I honestly don't know where to start with this video. There's so much that happened, so much to talk about. Hopefully you will have already seen the two edits that I posted on my YouTube channel, one being Entropy and the other being Ashes. However, Ashes, the cut doesn't have the original music that it was created to. I'll explain a little bit about that later. So what is it? A couple of years ago, Grace and I had wanted to get together and do a short piece that she had choreographed, but 2.5 years had slipped by and I got a call out of the blue again from Grace, and she had a piece that she wanted to film, and it just seemed like the timing was right. She found a location, Matiko Studios, where everything seemed to align. I'm hoping this video will be very interesting to quite a wide audience in terms of those interested in cameras. The piece I will be talking about was shot on the Canon R6, the Sony A7S 3 and the GH5 with the Atmos Ninja. It was I find it a very interesting conundrum to have, because you've got three very different cameras and different strengths, and I was going to be not necessarily pitting them against one another on this shoot, but it was definitely going to be a challenge, and there may be quite a lot of stress points between comparing each of the cameras. So Ashes is technically the piece that was put to me as a choreographed piece to capture. Entropy was some shots that I also had wanted to capture from seeing the dance, but wasn't really a part of the performance in the way that it had been, say, laid out by Grace. So it's kind of like a revision of what was there. Both already should have been released on my YouTube channel, so if you haven't seen that, maybe check those out and come back. Otherwise, I'm sure I'm going to be flooding this YouTube video with lots of cuts from both. It was a very tight amount of time to capture the dance. It was 4 hours. That was with getting in and obviously getting out. Overall, I think I would have liked a lot more time to capture a lot more detail. So Entropy was some of the takes that we were focusing a little bit more on detail, but ultimately there was a lot of time on the day that was, I guess, trying to make sure the overall piece was captured for Grace, and then anything on top of that was kind of extra. Just to note, the piece that I released on my channel didn't have the edited track, which was Ashes by Celine Dion. That was a piece that Grace wanted to use and had effectively choreographed everything to. So when editing, that was what was on my timeline, but I knew if I put that onto YouTube, it would just pretty much get banned straight away. Otherwise, if you're happy just to view it from the point of the editing, cameras, grading, then it should be fine to view with the kind of underscore track that I used. So I'm just going to play back through OBS and hopefully record the audio, so if the image quality may suffer a little bit, but it's the most convenient way of playing back and I guess talking or pausing. I'm going to be shuffling backwards and forwards, so stick with me. I've got the camera names in the top right hand corner. It's there just so you can keep track on what's going on. These images on the start are pretty much all the R6. These were the Tokina shots. So these shots you're looking at now was the Tokina 2.8 11-16mm. So these shots on the RS2 were very tricky. It wasn't behaving particularly well, and I think in the end on this I had to use the Ronin S. I'm more familiar with the Ronin S, so on these shots it just seemed a bit more stable and more controlled, where the RS2 seemed a little bit more jerky and less, if you wanted more controlled movements, it was a bit trickier to get. It was just a lot easier. But then again, I'm a lot more experienced on the Ronin S, and I was using my own rather than borrowing the RS2, so there may be some human error. The RS2 was a lifesaver because going for roughly 2 minutes on the main portion of the dance in one take, it was quite a physical piece, and the dancers were going up and down the length of the ballroom floor, so having to keep up with them, having to literally be spinning around them as they're dancing, it felt like a lifetime. And after a take or two on the Ronin S, I was just glad to be able to A and B the different cameras, and mostly I shot on the RS2. So switching over to the Sony A7S 3, first things was the balcony shots. I think this was one of the very few shots that I used from above. but it was just the best kind of opening to give a sense of the room, because I think from the beginning, other than the opening shots, one of the issues was bringing in Gracie at the beginning as an intro, flipping straight into bringing in obviously this Ben as a second dancer. You kind of needed to just set the staging of the room. So as you can see, as straight off the bat, we are kind of getting up to, you know, a bit of movement and a bit more speed. I think that shot there, as you can probably tell, that was on the 55 in the Zeiss, and again, you're moving quickly, but it's keeping focus. You're, you know, getting it, going in and out, moving, changing. Faces are going from one face to the other, but it's just keeping up. The mirrors were very problematic. Often when shooting, you'd have to keep an eye out to make sure it wasn't being picked up in a reflection, and a lot of the angles that I would have loved to have captured just wasn't possible because of the reflection issue. There was a whole wall of mirrors which basically you'd expect in a dance studio, but did prove problematic, as you would well imagine. A lot of these wides are all on the Canon, are all on the 16mm, and on the GH5 there was all shot on the anamorphic 1.8, and it's very obvious when it comes in. With the windows, as you can tell, I wasn't that bothered about blowing them out. In actual fact, on the actual log there was a lot more details, but I did lift, and kind of it wasn't really important to see what was outside. I think obviously on the Sony, I think I still maintain a little bit more detail than on the Canon. With so many cuts and so many cameras, the grading really did take a bit of time to try and adjust, because on different takes the lighting outside would change. The CRI of the lights was a difficult issue to for the skin tones when it casted a little bit of, say, yellow, and it was okay, but I think I would have again liked to have spent more time correcting some of that. So a lot of the movements was zipping around them, trying to get that just sense of dynamism that they were creating themselves. I remember running around, zipping around the performers towards the end here, and the RSC here was fantastic. It was lightweight. It enabled me at the very end of the shoot just to be able to get those little bits of extra energy and movement and without any problems, rather than being tied at the end of the take and kind of compromise. So with all that being said, I will play Entropy, but I'm going to play with the cameras that were used. So again, I mentioned that I had the A7S III, the Canon R6, and the GH5 with the Ninja. So moving on to the playback of Entropy, this particular shot at the very start was mostly done in After Effects to get this streaking and kind of effect. Pretty much masks certain parts of the arms and the background and stretch them out, so it's not an in-camera effect. Just wanted something a bit more airy to kick it off. Here you can see on the anamorphic GH5, it's probably about as much bokeh as you're going to get, really, because you can see a slight oval, not as much as I would like. It's only a 1.33. But the blue flares still do it for me. I still quite enjoy that. Sony here just really performed fantastically. I think these were the 55 on the Zeiss, but it just really, again, if you were trying to manual focus that on the fly, it would be a lot trickier given the time. GH5 holding its own, doing still quite well. This was definitely one of the few cases where the Sony's autofocus could have selected the face, but for the most part the Sony, I would say 99% of the time, picked and locked on to exactly what the eye would be looking for. I felt it was, although I kept this one mostly in colour, I did at one point just pay a little bit homage to the original cut there of going back into black and white, but again, really enjoying the Sony's 100 frames, or in this case it might have been 120. This particular piece in the black dress was just shot at the very beginning as a test, but I wanted to add it in there. You can, if I find it again, there was an effect on this in Resolve where I was able to completely isolate the dancer using 3D depth mapping, and the depth mapping basically just picks a certain part of the shot
and literally not green screens out, but you're able to select or blur out, and then I will just put a very specific blur on the background just to bring a bit more highlight to Grace and what's going on. A little bit experimental. I just thought it'd be fun to have a play with one of the new features in the latest version of Resolve. So there you have it. Not massively more to say, so check out the version if you want to see it in full without me talking over the top. But I'll get back to some other thoughts now.
I think this needs a Danish break.
I could not have shot this video 5 years ago without the autofocus being what it is today with mirrorless cameras. You would need more people, more kit to pull this kind of shoot off, namely a focus puller, a wireless monitor with very little or minimum latency. The difficulty of shooting around 1.8 or less is that if you're moving and you're running around with a gimbal, you're way better off using an autofocus that can lock onto an eye, face or body. This isn't true of every circumstance, but here definitely could not have been done without it. Especially if you don't have time to be able to do more than a single take or two at best. I think in this day and age, having cameras that do have the autofocus is a lifesaver. I was incredibly happy with how both the Canon and Sony performed, giving a strong 9.5 out of 10 in the autofocus category.
Because the dance was mostly, again, choreographed by Grace and it hadn't meant to, be shot in slow motion or have any slowdowns, the elements where I did do that, that was just my input into certain moments that I wanted to, or felt that a slowdown or a, bit of a time ramp may help the performance piece. In Entropy, I was able to use all my, slow motion 120 frames or, 50 frames to kind of create a different sequence. But for the Ashes take, it really was a case of shooting it in 25 frames just in order to keep the motion, keep everything to kind of portray what was choreographed as best as possible. So I hired the RF 16mm from Hire a Camera. So if you don't know about them, check them out. It was a really good experience. It was just a case of I'd used them before and they had the availability, and yeah, it was a good, clean, quick experience. I actually own the Tokina. It's the Tokina 2.8. I don't know if it will actually focus on this. This lens, I adore this lens. It's fantastic. I really do like it. It's got a look to it, a bit like my love of the 80 to 200, which I have here. It has quite a distinct look. I find it, I've done a whole video about this, so again, if you want to see why I like it, you can check it out. Although this proved to be a bit of a challenge on the day, but I'll get into that in a little bit. Indeed, I went to Recce Matiko Studios a little bit earlier in the week. I think it might have been the week before, and I did a few shots because I just wanted to get some of the hall empty, but I had gone with Grace to do a recce and I thought, oh, fantastic, I'll just get a few extra shots. However, it was quite shocking. It was the first time using this lens and I was at around, say, 12, because this is an 11 to 16. And there was nothing but wobble. It was unusable. It was atrocious. I came back, I was shocked. I thought there was something wrong with the camera. Obviously I was aware of it, but I hadn't seen it so badly done, because I would either be, either on a gimbal when I'd used it before, or in a situation where it wasn't, walking around, but just kind of walking and lightly, gauging the room with it. It was just unusable. And then I was shocked and I thought, oh my goodness, there is something wrong with this camera or this lens working with it. Came back, did hours of testing at home, still seeing it. And eventually I figured out that the wobble on the camera could, unless it was at 16mm, literally it couldn't use, because it was just kind of shaking and wobbling and would just be all over the place. That was a good thing that came out of the initial recce. Thankfully at Matiko, they allowed me to come in for roughly an hour just to do some quick test shots with this. And when I did it at 16, all was fine. I did do it on a gimbal, it wasn't handheld at that point, and you'll see some of the shots from that littered throughout. Now, I wanted to use some of this and some of the RF-16, both at, you know, at 16mm, to be able to do an A and B video for you guys. But on the day, the weight of this lens, plus again the gimbal and the speed at which we were working, guess which lens didn't make it onto the camera at all. So yeah, it was a funny one, because I guess it's, in some ways, it is a comparison that totally one lens totally won, because of the weight, despite the, you know, the love of the lens and the kind of look, in actual fact, this kind of failed because the timing, everything just kind of went against it. The lenses that were sharper and clearer and cleaner meant that pairing them up proved less of a challenge. Now, I still use this on some of the shots at the beginning of the Ashes video, and you know, I love them, and they were, you know, gorgeous shots. I think in the long run, the weight and the time for this particular occasion, the RF-16 definitely was a winner, and I think it may end up in my camera kit at some point. One of the things that I had been curious about on this shoot was using a black, I was going to say black Promus, but it's not. This one's called a black diffusion K&F concept. Found them to be useful. However, I don't know if anyone has seen, I recently did a Mikey drop-in filter mount, which I'm using right now on the Canon R6, actually shooting on 50mm 1.2, which is a new addition, and if I'd had that lens on this shoot, I definitely would have used it. It came down to the fact that because I was using 3 different camera systems with multiple lenses, in order to 2 different gimbals, in order to make sure that I was getting the same kind of black diffusion on each of the lenses, whether it's I'm using an 1/8 here or a 1/4 or, you know, whatever it was, it just seemed to be a case that, you know, it would have just thrown one more thing into the equation on the day. On the recce where I went into the Matico Studios and was using the Tokina, I did shoot some on diffusion. I really did like how it made the studio look, but in the end I chose not to do that, just because we had so many variables, and to throw one more into the mix just seemed a little bit too much. So coming back to the cameras, there was the GH5 with the Atmos Ninja. Now, this surprised me massively. You'd probably say, oh, it's an old camera. It's, you know, everyone, you know, has a little bit of love for the GH5, but compared to a Sony A7S Mark III or the Canon, it was, you know, is it a bit daft carrying this shooting? Yes, it's 10-bit, but it's still only 10-bit internal up to, say, 25 frames. When you go to 50 at 4K, it drops to 8-bit. So that's why I used the Ninja, just to extend the life of it a little bit for this shoot. So it was a bit more of a fair fight. And in actual fact, some of the images that I got from the GH5 were my favorite. Spoiler alert, I still think the Sony was the best for dynamic range, because it is, the numbers, the maths say that. It did have the most, you know, detail quality in the image to be able to, you know, bring a lot out of. However, in terms of, again, look, vibe, and, you know, holding its own against to it within the scenario, because again, if you're in a scenario that doesn't require all of those 13 stops of dynamic range that the Sony gives you, you've got a bit more, you've got a bit of latitude to play with. And, you know, yes, I'm not going to argue, you know, try and say use this over a Sony at all, but with this paired with the Sure anamorphic, you know, I just think it created some beautiful images. And see for yourself, see what you think. That was using manual focus. So I was at 1.8 on this, and it just really it worked for me. Let me know what you think in the comments. Again, you may disagree, you may not like it at all. I specifically wanted a little bit of use of anamorphic in there, even though it would give a different look, you know, having the blue flare in there. You'll probably notice it more when that happens to know which is which. Not on Entropy, but on the Ashes version that I put on the YouTube channel, you'll see all of the camera names in the top left-hand corner. No, sorry, top right-hand corner of the screen. So So yeah, have a look, let me know what you think. I think this lens paired with the GH5 is a winner. In actual fact, all of Sue-Ray lenses I really love. I do love the anamorphic look, and I think it adds something to the look of it. Obviously on a micro four thirds, you're not getting quite the bokeh necessarily, but the flares I think add something quite nice and specific to it. The image quality with the Ninja, I definitely think I'll use it a little bit more now going forwards, especially when shooting alongside these other cameras. Lens choices aside, the room, the lights, the difficulty of, chandelier CRIs, no haze or no bloom, some of the variables that, come into play. Ultimately, if you don't have a take with everything covered, and if you don't have enough takes of the performance piece, it's by the wayside, which brings us straight on to the next point, which is the edit. So I'm not going to talk too long about the edit. I'll try and keep it brief. I think there were about 30 odd cameras that I had linked up or thereabouts to choose from the take, and it was a case of sitting with Grace and going through, albeit virtually, which bits of the dance was she happy with, what could we use. And one of the things why I shot so much on the 16 to say 35 was because you want to capture the dance, you want to see the dance. It's going to probably in the edit reduce the aspect ratio down a touch. There's no point just being completely tight in on everything, and there was a certain amount of coverage. So it was the wides that was covered first. I think in the Entropy cut, was able to bring in some of those details more so. If there was one thing looking back, like personally from a post, which has nothing to do with the actual filming, dance or anything, but musically, I think I wouldn't have picked a commercial track, although it kind of obviously makes sense from a dancing point of view, but from obviously from editing or posting or from YouTube or whatever, it's like, it just makes it difficult because it's, unless you're able to physically license a track, it means that you're limited in either the audience that you can show it to, which ultimately on this channel, I chose not to use the Ashes track on there. I didn't want it to get taken down. So clearly I left it on Instagram because I thought maybe at least on one platform it should be there for people to view. So I think it just means that I think if I was doing it again, I would either work with either a custom track or with a track that you can license. Then again, I knew that going in, which is why I knew I wanted to do a reversion or a slightly different cut of it. But it's worth noting, if anyone else is doing this in the future, it's a consideration to bear in mind. Oh, before I forget, there was one key thing about the edit and the pace of this whole thing is that it was never designed to feel like one flawless take from start to finish. Because of the idea and the concept of the story, it was more like the journey of a relationship, and therefore, although the dance is happening or being cut together as a complete piece of choreography, it was like they were dancing at one point in the room and then it might cut to a different part of the room. So never doing it in the same place. It helped production-wise because you didn't have to worry about continuity. I'm not sure if that is communicated or not. That was the premise or the idea behind it, and that's kind of why it's almost like a series of match cuts to the choreography rather than a continuous piece. It was actually a very difficult one to grade because, again, so many different cameras, so many different lenses. Some had NDs at certain times, some didn't, and it's just, again, it was a lot of variables to try and make look similar, and different lighting. I did have some support and help on the day, but other than that, there wasn't budget for a lot. Very run and gun. You keeping your wits about you, trying to get the best possible image on the day with what you had available. With all being said and done, the biggest constraint to this whole enterprise was the time factor. You can plan, but sometimes when you're there on the day, you can still make a decision to do something that will affect, the overall look. So, I don't think you can ever completely plan everything down and expect it to roll as you plan it to be, but good planning always leads to a better result, even if you do have to moderate what you do, because at least you have the thinking and the reasoning behind the what and the why before, if you do then change it, it's kind of done for, well, it's done for a reason. There was one last funny curveball at the end where, after everything had been graded and all, mostly problem solved, the questions of look and everything, it was a case of, what does it look like in black and white? And it was a bit of a last minute change to shift everything into black and white. It was a kind of curiosity, and then when Grace saw it, I think she kind of really liked the black and white look, and I think that in the end was what went forward. For the final cut, I still think that the color version is obviously going to be more of use to you to look at in terms of differences of the camera and the qualities of how it appears. So that's why I think on this channel I've left it in as color so you can see more of what's going on. And yes, the clips are graded. Probably have some of this on screen talking about, or have done already. This is a real world situation. Sometimes I think just, filming the same thing in an isolated case scenario, it doesn't really give you real world examples. It's kind of being out in the field doing something, using lenses alongside each other and cameras that you really get to see and test what the strengths are and what they do. That's not to say doing those types of tests aren't good. We all watch them, we all enjoy them. But sometimes when I see those more clinical examples, which are great, you don't really get the hands-on feel of them. Case in point being the Tokina that I had. It didn't even make it out of the bag on the day of the shoot, because by the time I had done 1 or 2 shoots, even with the 16, it was like, I don't want to add on extra weight to what I'm already shooting, even though it's only a couple of hours. So it's all cumulative, isn't it? I'm glad I used it on what I did, so it's still in there. If given a bit more time or had an easy rig or a different type of system, definitely would have used this a lot more for that, the characteristics of this that it brings. But when you have lenses that have specific characteristics, shooting with lenses which are clearer and sharper. For example, on the Sony, we had on the 55, I think it's a 1.8, I think it's a Zeiss. I would consider a very clinical lens. It doesn't have the kind of characteristics. It removes all those types of characteristics to give you a very clear and sharp approach. When shooting with, the GH5 and, having lenses with something which maybe gives it a bit more character, like this lens with this camera, is a great match. Same with the anamorphic lens I spoke about earlier. These choices do matter, and it makes a big difference on the screen. A big thank you to all who helped and supported on this, and especially to Grace and Ben for all their efforts on the dance floor on the day. I think it was definitely a lot of energy that just had to keep on going. It was a very physical day, and they really did a good job and was a good sport with everything with that. Matiko Studios for allowing me to come in and have that extra time to recce and do a test shoot, which really helped in the process. And a shout out to Hire a Camera. It was great using them, and I'm sure I'll be using them again in the future. They've got a lot of kit that I have my eye on and would like to test further bits of kit in the future. So with all that being said, I am very grateful to have done this project with Grace. She's lovely to work with. I think she has helped craft a project that I'm happy with. I hope you can watch it and learn something from it. Whether you like it or not, I hope you can learn or glean something from it. Some of the things that have been said. I probably will be cutting some of the mentions of the kit into smaller bite-size uploads. So if you have any comments, do let me know, because I may be able to address them or answer them when I do one of the short videos. As ever, feedback, likes, shares, subscribes, all that good stuff. Please feel free to comment below, and it all helps to either let other people see and build and grow the channel and or community, as the saying goes. So that's all for me. See you all in the next one. Bye now.